Hi, my name is Anna and I will be working alongside Bevelin and Angela. We are going to make a video essay about sociology of childhood. Submission date is 9 of June 2024.
It's almost impossible for us to imagine what it might be like for kids to not have a childhood. But for most of human history, there was not such a thing. Up until a few years ago, being a kid tended to be brutal. Medicine was minimal and public health was almost non existent for most of the Western history, which means lots of babies never made up out of infancy. And if they did, that's when things really started to get hard. From the ancient world until around the 1600s, kids were basically considered to be small adults who needed to learn the ways of the world as fast as possible. In fact, we can see this in a lot of medieval art, where kids tend to look like many adults rather than children. People at that time didn't really understand the concept of being a kid. For instance, most people in the Western world at the time believed that newborns are actually evil. The idea was that a child was born sinful and could only be purified through teaching. Instead of spending time playing with friends and scraping their knees, kids tend to scrape up the rest of their bodies working hard to help provide for the family, either working in the field or helping with tasks around the house, or most often both. Kids would start helping out the families around age 5 and would level up to more grown ups jobs as they were able. Most children were also expected to go get jobs as soon as they could. A popular job for children as young as 4 in the UK was chimney sweep. Since kids were so small, they had an easier time crawling into soot filled chimney and sweeping it clean. The fact is that incredibly hard and unhealthy work never seems to occur to anyone. But thankfully for us all, that all started to change in the 1600s. For the first time, influential thinkers started to talk about children as innocent blank states in need to protection from the brutality of an adult world. People extended on those ideas and started to understand childhood as separate stage of life. Children were finally being left to develop more natural rather than being thrust into the adult world as early as possible. Just because people started to think about the concept of childhood definitely doesn't mean things change overnight. In fact, with the onset of the Industrial Revolution in the early 1980s, kids all across Europe and the US were back to work, with paid factory jobs popping up all over the place. Children suddenly became a key source for income for poor families. For the first time, children in mass could get jobs and brings home a paycheck, and most families needed the money. Suddenly, children as young as 9 or 10 could be found in the factories across the industrialized world. By the end of the 1980s, countries eventually put an end of the kids working in such a dangerous places. Childhood education became mandatory in most of the countries, and children were finally seen as people who need to be taken care of until they reach adulthood.
John Bowlby's theory of attachment. His theory emphasizes the significant influence of early childhood experiences on mental health. He stressed the importance of forming strong bonds with primary caregivers, especially within the first 3 years of life. Consistent caregiving in the first 5 years is crucial for nurturing a healthy personality. According to Bowlby's theory, children with secure attachment feel secure and comfortable with their primary caregiver. However, a post-war conspiracy theory suggests that Bowlby's attachment theory was introduced to prompt women to return home, ensuring job positions for returning men. GPIJ Cognitive Development. He observed that human infants have reflexes essential for survival in early life. These involuntary responses, such as breathing, crying, and blinking, are fundamental cognitive structures. In Piaget's theory, schemas are mental structures representing our ideas about things and how we interact with them. Combining schemas to form more complex behaviors is called operations. This learning process involves assimilation, integrating new information into existing knowledge, and accommodation, modifying existing schemas when encountering new information. Sociological perspectives, feminism originated in the mid-19th century, aiming to secure voting rights and education for women. Liberal feminists argue that gender inequality stemmed from socialization and ignorance. Radical feminists argue that gender inequality stemmed from a society controlled, dominated, and ruled by men. Marxist feminists argue that gender inequalities are primarily caused by capitalism, asserting that traditional family structures are rooted in capitalist ideology. The third stage emerging in the 1990s emphasizes the diversity of women's experiences based on factors such as class, gender, location, and sexuality. Functionalism or structural function theory proposes that society functions as an interconnected structure to meet individual needs. It advocates for the nuclear family as a cornerstone of social order and economic stability. According to functionalists, society sets norms, and the family ensures that children's fundamental needs are met. Marxism is a sociological perspective that emphasizes conflict in society. It highlights the unequal distribution of power and resources between the ruling and working classes. The family is seen as a tool of capitalism, serving to reproduce the workforce, perpetuate private property, and reinforce the capitalist economy. Other perspectives, childhood as a time of evil, the Puritan discourse, Thomas Hobbes advocated for autocratic parenting, believing that children were inherently evil and required strict control and punishment. He argued that absolute authority was essential in politics, relationship, and family due to adult self-interest. Strict parenting and discipline were believed to instill obedience to God in children during this time. Children were often viewed as willful and primarily served as household servants. Childhood is a time of becoming. John Locke introduced the concept of tabula rasa or blank slate, suggesting that children acquire knowledge through experiences and reasoning. He emphasized the impact of nurture over nature and promoted early education, respectful parenting, and enjoyable learning experiences for children. Childhood is a time of innocence, romantic discourse. Jean-Jacques Rousseau believed that children are inherently innocent and possess innate goodness. He taught that children should be allowed to develop at their own pace within natural environments, sheltered from the influences of civilization and oppressive adult authority.
Nowadays, childhood is a much better time for children, with better healthcare, education, and more support for physical and mental well-being. Children are protected by rules and regulations, and laws and legislation have been introduced to protect their rights. In Scotland, a young person is classed as a child until they turn 16, but the Children and Young People Scotland Act 2014 includes all young people up to the age of 18. This includes the rights of children and young people, which were taken from the UNCRC and is part of the Getting It Right for Every Child policy. The Curriculum for Excellence was also put in place to put learners at the heart of education. At its centre are the 4 fundamental capacities which are aimed at helping children and young people become successful learners, confident individuals, responsible citizens, and effective contributors. Let's ask children what they know about their rights.
To have friends. The right to have fun.
I have the right to be heard.
To do family.
To learn.
To be protected by an adult.
To being safe.
Right to have love.
The right to go to school.
The right to play.
The right to have a family.
To be respected.
We have the right to play.
The right to have a home.
Stay hydrated and healthy.
To clean water.
The right to health service.
We have the right to be
a right to be kind.
To be happy.
The right to learn.
I have the right to a good education.
It's right to have a home.
The right to have friends.
We have the right to clean water and clean food. Who created the rights? It's probably just a common sense.
God.
It should be some countries and government.
Jesus.
The United Nations.
UN Convention!
A lot of public views of children will be determined by how the media portrays them. In 1993, 2 10-year-old boys abducted, tortured and murdered 2-year-old James Bulger. There was a huge media and public interest in the case, as everyone was horrified that such a terrible crime could be committed by 2 young boys. They were described by the tabloids as freaks of nature, and The Sun said the devil himself couldn't have made a better job of 2 fiends. It was mentioned that both boys came from broken homes, whereas if their parents had still been together, it probably wouldn't have been commented on. Whenever you hear about children being in trouble, it will always be brought up if they come from a single-parent family, as the media are very quick to stereotype in this way, and unfortunately the general public pounce on this information. Although childhood is much better now than it was many years ago, many children are still living in poverty. The government introduced a welfare system to provide families living in poverty with extra money and introduced free school meals for those on benefits. A school clothing grant is also available, and pregnant women can get a Best Start grant, which is made up of 3 payments: the pregnancy and baby payment, the early learning payment and the school age payment. Scotland went one step further, and through the Child Poverty Scotland Act 2017, they introduced the Scottish Child Payment in 2021. It was originally for families with children under the age of 6 receiving certain benefits, but recently changed to all children under the age of 16. Eligible families will receive £26.70 per child per week. The government have also introduced different legislation and policies to try and protect the rights of children and give them the best start in life. The PVG scheme was introduced in 2011 to protect children and vulnerable adults. It was put in place to ensure that all adults working with these groups are suitable to do so. Getting it right for every child is a national proposal to improve the well-being of children. This is used to support, promote and safeguard the well-being of every child and uses the 8 well-being indicators to describe how a child is doing at any point in time. It works with children and their families to try and improve their well-being. The Children and Young People Scotland Act 2014 was put in place to ensure Scotland becomes the best place in the world for children growing up. It concentrates on the earlier years of a child's life to try and identify when they need help and provide early intervention and preventative measures rather than responding to a crisis once it happens. It increased the number of hours of funded preschool education for children aged 3 to 5 and eligible 2-year-olds from August 2021, and also works in line with the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child and GERFEC. The Education Additional Support for Learning Scotland Act 2004, as amended 2009, was put in place to identify children that may face a barrier to their learning due to additional needs. Thank you for watching our Sociology of Childhood presentation. We hope you enjoyed it.